It's the most amazing thing in cookery that things always come back into fashion again. Now, one of the most sexy dishes that everybody is preparing again is beef Wellington. But because I've been there the first time, I'm well aware of the snags that one gets with beef Wellington. Undercooked meat, pastry that's soggy and falling off, and at the end of the day, when you get this slice of sort of mediocre, flavorless meat on your plate with a piece of pastry around it, it's nothing to write home about. And yes, it's expensive to make. But let me show you how to prepare beef Wellington that is absolutely superb. Now, we use a whole fillet here. Now, I just thought it'd be interesting from a teaching point of view. Whenever you use a whole fillet, if you were going to cook the whole fillet, you can see why it's necessary to tie up the tail bit and to tie this to keep it together. But today we're not going to use the whole fillet, and we're going to slice that fillet into steaks. I'll do this bit, but in order to get a bigger steak out of the fillet, you slice it half through, and then you butterfly each slice. In other words, slice it, not quite through, and the next slice is right through. And then you butterfly this open. Now we've got our fillet steaks beautifully sliced and butterflied open. Now it is so important never ever to cook steak from the fridge, straight from the fridge. You leave your meat out of the fridge to come to room temperature. And instead of just leaving the meat, you know, unseasoned, season the meat and drizzle it with olive oil and pat that into the meat. Turn it over and do exactly the same thing on the other side. So this meat is now going to stay at room temperature for half an hour. Once it's had a chance to rest, then we're going to fry it, and I'll show you the frying quickly. Now the meat has had a chance to rest for half an hour. Now we're taking these beautiful fillet steaks, and make sure that this pan is boiling hot, and put them on the pan. And we are just going to cook them until they're lightly marked. The idea is not to cook them through, it's just to get the flavor development from the outside browning. Right, now we've got our steaks nicely, lightly seared on both sides. Don't go over the top with the cooking, because they will cook in the oven again. Just take them off, then we're ready for the next step. Now the thing that gives beef Wellington its flavor is chicken liver pate and mushrooms. Now, I think the nicest chicken liver pate is a pate that you bake in the oven. And the recipe you'll find together with the beef Wellington recipe. And what happens is you get this velvety smooth pate. And what we've done and this is the traditional way of preserving pate. You can see the butter on top. You spread or you pour a thin layer of melted butter. This baked pate you can keep in the fridge for a month and it'll be fine. And it's wonderful on toast. And I mean, obviously it's quite nice when you have guests to have this lovely pate available. Now, once you've got the pate on, then we've got some mushrooms here, which we've just stir-fried with a bit of fresh thyme to give it extra flavor. And you will always find that once the mushrooms get cooked, they draw a little bit of water. And this white sauce powder is absolutely superb, instead of maizena and all this other stuff, to just soak up a bit of the liquid. So here we've got our mushrooms, which have now cooled down. And you can see they're not watery at all. Now you just divide the mushrooms between the steaks. Now this lot just needs to stand while you prepare the pastry. Now for this dish, I've used our lovely sour cream pastry. Now obviously it's best to make the pastry in advance, and the secret to keeping pastry in the fridge is to wrap it first in greaseproof paper and then overwrap it with cling film. And also don't attempt to roll out pastry that is fresh out of the fridge, because it'll be too hard. So this has now had a chance to relax a little bit, come to room temperature, and now we're ready to roll. Use your flour dredger. Put a generous amount of flour. And I've got my favorite old rolling pin here. And before you start rolling, just pre-roll the rolling pin so that everything has a light dusting, everybody, including you, of flour on it. That's right, darling, you look great. And when you roll pastry, light little movements. And we need to roll the pastry out fairly large. Now I want the pastry to be about this long, but I want it twice as wide as it is at the moment. So keeping it loose, just roll it out sideways. We're now ready to start putting the steaks onto the pastry. But one of the major problems with steak Wellington or beef Wellington is that this pastry gets soggy, because as the meat cooks, it gives off a lot of juice. So you need to waterproof the pastry. And I really sort of thought about this long and hard. And in the end, I realized the obvious route to go is to use rice paper. Now, rice paper is often used in Chinese cooking. It's used to making sweets, that kind of stuff. Okay, so there's your rice paper lining. Now the steaks go on there. Instead of just rolling it in the pastry and giving you this kind of sausage roll looking thing, what I'm going to do is to cut the pastry like you would do with a Russian fish pie. Cut it on the diagonal, leading up to the meat. And now you plait them. Come, sweetie. What would have been easier, and I'd forgotten to do this, is if I had worked on the baking paper. That would have made the lifting easier. Now when this masterpiece comes out of the oven, it needs to be glossy and golden and all those good things. So in order to achieve that, you use an egg wash. And in an egg wash, you always put a pinch of salt and a pinch of sugar. And then you just beat it up with a fork, and then you paint this. Now obviously on the day of your dinner party, you don't need to stand there all stressed out doing all this hard work. This you do the day before. And you leave the Wellington resting in the fridge, and on the day you swan into the kitchen, you put it into the oven, and it comes out looking beautiful. Another really good tip is, instead of putting this in the oven on this baking sheet, now obviously the baking sheet is cold, but if you have another baking sheet in your oven preheating, and then you slip this baking paper onto a hot baking sheet, then you immediately get that heat from underneath to crisp the pastry underneath. Now don't you think that looks wonderful? And I know what they'll all say, darling, you are a fantastic cook. And you can see how easy it is.